I spent 29 years with the Forest Service in the Arkansas Ozarks. People called me a ranger, and I never corrected them, though a district only has the one, and it was never me. For most of that time, my job came down to explaining rock to people. What limestone does when water gets into it. Why a hillside settles. Why a cave is where a cave is, and not 200 yards to the left. So when I tell you what my trail camera photographed in my hay meadow, understand that I am not a man who gets worked up over a hole in the ground. I have been in more holes in the ground than most people know exist. On the 29th of October, 2022, at 2:47 in the morning, a Browning camera I had strapped to a cedar on the east side of that meadow took a picture of a rectangle of ground standing open on a hinge, sod on the top of it, grass still growing out of the sod, bent over the edge from its own weight. Underneath it, black, and the infrared did not reach into it at all. 14 seconds later, the camera fired again and the meadow was flat and closed, and there was nothing out there but 11 acres of fescue going brown for the winter. I have spent 3 years trying to argue myself out of those two pictures. I'm going to walk you through the whole thing in the order it came to me, because the order is what makes it hard. Before we get into it, let me know where you're watching from and if you've had an encounter like this. My name's Wayne Dixon. I'm 66 now, and I live on 87 acres in Stone County, Arkansas, about 7 miles up Highway 14 from Mountain View, and then another 2 up a county road that turns to gravel at the second cattle guard. My grandfather bought the place in 1946 with money he came home from the Pacific with. My father kept it. I bought my 2 sisters out in '98 on a loan I paid for 11 years, and I've never regretted it, and I want that on the record before I tell you the rest. Because there's a version of this story where a man walks away from his family's ground, and you ought to know what that costs. The land runs north off the county road and drops toward a hollow. Steep on the west, gentle on the east, the way Ozark ground lays. Timbered on both ends, open in the middle. White oak, post oak, hickory, shortleaf pine in the older cuts, and cedar coming up every place a cow ever stood. Down in the hollow there's a wet weather branch that runs 3 seasons out of 4 and dries to a string of pools in August. The rock under all of it is Boone limestone, cherty and full of holes, which in this part of Arkansas is another way of saying the ground under your feet is a sponge with the water squeezed out. The open part is the meadow. 11 acres, more or less, on a bench about 2/3 of the way up the slope. My grandfather cleared it for pasture and ran cattle on it until 1971. My father ran cattle on it until '84. I have never run a cow in my life and don't intend to. I bush hog it twice a year, in June and again in September. And I let a fellow named Carl Griffin cut hay off the flatter half when he needs it, which is most years. Carl is 74 and lives 1.5 miles down the road, and has been cutting hay off that meadow since before I owned it. At the north end of the meadow, right up against the tree line, there's a rock foundation and a cellar. That was the first house, the one my grandfather lived in before he built the one I'm in now. It burned in '53 from a flue fire. The foundation is dry-laid limestone, about 18 by 24, and the cellar is a hole in the ground with a rock-lined throat and 2 courses of block around the top where somebody at some point tried to make it usable again. The wooden doors rotted off before I was born. It's a real cellar, and I mention it because for about 6 weeks it was the best explanation I had, and then it stopped being an explanation and started being a problem. I retired in 2020, 29 years, most of it out of the Sylamore Ranger District office in Mountain View. I started on a trail crew, spent a decade running cave tours and doing resource work at Blanchard Springs, and finished on recreation management, which is a long way of saying I picked up other people's trash and told them where they could camp. I liked the job the whole time, which not everybody can say. The cave work is the part that matters here. Blanchard Springs Caverns opened to the public in 1973, and by the time I came on, there was a whole culture around it. Men in that district who knew where every hole in the Sylamore country was and had spent their weekends since the '60s crawling into most of them. I was never a surveyor, never had the patience, but I carried tape and read instruments for men who did, on my own time, for about 12 years, and I learned enough to know what I'm looking at when somebody puts a piece of mylar on a table and says, "Here's the passage, and here's where it quits." The cameras went up because of hogs. Feral hogs got into Stone County in a real way sometime in the 2000s. And by 2021, they were rooting my meadow like somebody had run a disc over it. If you've never seen fresh hog sign in a hayfield, it looks like a rototiller went through drunk. 10, 12-foot patches turned over 8 inches deep, roots up, rock up, and every one of them a place where Carl's sickle bar is going to find a limestone cobble and lose a tooth. Carl came up in June of 21, took one look, and said he wasn't running a mower through that until somebody did something about it. So I called the county extension office, and they put me on to the folks who run the eradication program. And a fellow came out and told me what everybody in Arkansas already knows, which is that you do not shoot your way out of a hog problem. Kill one out of a sounder of 14 and you have educated the other 13. What you do is trap the whole bunch at once, and to do that you have to know how many there are and when they come and where they come in, which means cameras. I bought 2 Browning Strike Force HD Pro X units at the store in Mountain View, $119 a piece, which was more than I wanted to spend and less than I would have paid a month later. 6 AA lithiums each, 32 gigabyte cards, no glow infrared so the hogs wouldn't get shy of the flash. I put one on a cedar on the east side of the meadow, covering the corn I'd been putting out, and one on a post at the south gate covering the trail the sounder was using to come up out of the hollow. The first card I pulled had 406 pictures on it, and I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and went through every one, which took most of a morning and which I enjoyed more than I expected to. Deer, mostly. A doe and 2 fawns that came through the same gap in the fence every evening within about 20 minutes of the same time. Raccoons. An armadillo that tripped the camera 9 times in one night working the same 6 feet of ground back and forth like it had lost a set of keys. 2 coyotes at 4 in the morning, one behind the other, not hurrying, and hogs, 14 of them, exactly like the man said, coming up out of the hollow through the south gate between 10 and 11 at night and staying until 3 or 4, a big sow with a notch out of her right ear, and a dozen assorted younger ones, and 1 boar that didn't come every night, and that I would have guessed at 250 pounds. I got into a rhythm with it. Wanda, my wife, would go to bed around 10, and I'd stay up and read. And in the morning she'd be at the counter, and I'd be at the table with the laptop, scrolling. She has never had any interest in the pictures. She'd walk past with the coffee pot and say anything good, and I'd say hogs, and that was the extent of it for 4 months. We've been married since '83. She taught 4th grade in Mountain View for 26 years, and she has a way of being unimpressed that I've found useful my whole life. Our daughter Michelle is in Batesville, 40 miles east, with her husband and our grandson Ryan, who was 15 that fall and thought the hog cameras were the most interesting thing his grandfather had ever done, which tells you something about the rest of it. We had a dog then, Bud, a Walker and Redbone cross that came to us as a stray in 2014 with a collar and no tag, 9 years old that fall, and mostly retired himself. He slept on the porch in warm weather and on a piece of carpet by the wood stove in cold. And he went with me on every trip to the cameras, out ahead, working the edges, never more than 100 yards off.
Quick thing before we get into it. I have a book coming out. It's called the Bigfoot Codex. It's a compilation of all my research and findings. It's kind of my baby. So if you want to check it out, link's down below. And let's get you back to the video.
We trapped the sounder in October of 2021. Corral trap, 16 panels, a gate on a cell trigger, and about 6 weeks of baiting before we ever set it. Because you have to teach a hog that the trap is a restaurant before you can make it a trap. Caught 11 of the 14 on the 8th of October. The boar and 2 others weren't in there and never came back to the corn. So the man from the program was right about educating them. That should have been the end of the cameras. But by then I'd found out I liked them. I left both units up and bought a 3rd that winter. A Browning Recon Force Elite that shoots video, because I wanted to see the deer move instead of stand there. All through 2022 I ran 3 cameras on that meadow and pulled the cards every other Saturday. And by September I had north of 9,000 pictures of 11 acres of grass. That's what I want you to hold on to. 15 months. 9,000 pictures. Every square foot of that meadow that a camera could see. Photographed hundreds of times. In every season, in every light, wet and dry and frozen, I knew what that ground looked like better than I knew the back of my own hand. And I mean that without any flourish. A man does not look at the back of his hand 9,000 times. A new sounder moved in that spring, smaller, 7 or 8 animals, and they worked the west side instead of the south gate. I wasn't in any hurry about them. Carl got his hay off in June before they tore up much, and I figured I'd trap them in the fall when the acorns quit. The hogs quit coming on the 7th of September, 2022. On the 6th of September, the west camera has 41 pictures of hogs between 11:20 at night and 2 in the morning. Rooting, walking. A young one scratching itself on a cedar. The last one is at 2:04 a.m. Then at 2:06 there are 9 pictures in a row, one every 4 seconds, of hogs running, not trotting, running, all in the same direction, west to east across the frame, toward the fence and the timber on the far side. And in the 3rd and 4th images the big sow is in the air, with all 4 feet off the ground. Hogs do not run like that unless something is on them. And there is nothing behind them in the frame. Nothing in the frame at all except grass, and the fence, and the tree line, and 8 hogs leaving. 2:06 a.m. And then the camera doesn't fire again until 6:19 the next evening, and that's a doe. The hogs never came back to that meadow, and they have not come back since. Carl asked me in the spring how the hog situation was, and I told him it had resolved itself, and he said that was the first time he ever heard that. At the time I thought a bear. We've got black bears in the Sylamore country, real ones, and they've been here since the state moved them in from Canada in the 50s and 60s. A bear will move a sounder off. So will a pack of dogs, and so will a man with a spotlight. And there is no shortage of men with spotlights in Stone County. But a bear leaves pictures. Dogs leave pictures. A man with a spotlight leaves the most obvious pictures of all, because the camera catches the light. I had 3 cameras covering that meadow from 3 angles, and none of them photographed anything that ran those hogs. That was the first thing that didn't fit. And I filed it and moved on, the way you do. The second thing was the grass. I bush hogged on the 18th of September, which is about 2 weeks later than I like to. It had been a dry summer, one of those Arkansas summers where the branch quits in July instead of August, and the fescue was thin and the ragweed was thick. I was on the tractor going back and forth in the long way, the way I always do, east to west, and about halfway up the meadow I came over a low place and there was a patch of dead grass. I want to describe it exactly. It was a rectangle, and I don't mean roughly rectangular. It had 4 corners and 4 straight sides, and the grass inside it was dead all the way to the root, and the grass outside it was green, and the line between them was as clean as the edge of a board. I shut the tractor off and got down and paced it, and then I went back to the shop and got a tape because pacing wasn't good enough. 3 foot 4 inches by 5 foot 1 inch. I measured it twice. The long axis ran about 30 degrees east of north, which I know because I had a compass in the truck. Because I have always had a compass in the truck. The dead grass wasn't burned. It wasn't sprayed. And I'd have known, because glyphosate goes through a yellow stage first and there was no yellow anywhere. It wasn't smothered either. Lay a sheet of plywood in a hayfield for 2 weeks and you get dead grass, but you also get it flattened, with slick pale stems and a colony of bugs under it. This grass stood upright and dead, dry through the whole stem, the way it goes when the ground quits giving it water. I pulled a handful and the roots came out white and firm. Live roots, dead tops. I dug a little with my pocket knife right at the edge, straddling the line, and the soil on both sides looked the same. Clarksville chert, which is what we've got up here. A brown silt loam so full of rock you can't put a shovel in it without a conversation. Same moisture, same smell. I stood in the middle of 11 acres with a tape measure in my hand for probably 10 minutes. Then I did what I'd have done at work. I got the camera off the cedar, carried it to the house, and went back through 15 months of pictures looking for that rectangle. It wasn't there. Not in August, and not in any picture from any of the 3 cameras going back to the summer of 2021. And the low place where it sat was in the frame of the east camera, plain as day, 40-some feet out, photographed several hundred times. The last picture without it was September 5th. The first picture with it was September 20th, which was 2 days after I found it, because for 2 weeks in there the grass in that part of the meadow had gone tall enough that the camera couldn't see ground level. So the window was the 5th to the 18th. 13 days. And in the middle of that window, on the 7th, at 2:06 in the morning, 8 hogs had gone across that meadow like the devil was riding them. I did not connect those two things right away. I'll say that plainly, because it's tempting to tell it like I saw the shape of the thing from the beginning. I didn't. I had a dead patch of grass in a hayfield, and a sounder of hogs that had moved off. And in September of 2022, those were 2 separate small annoyances in the life of a retired man with too much time. What I did was call the county agent. I told him I had a rectangle of dead fescue in a hayfield, and asked him what causes that. He asked whether I'd had equipment parked on it, whether I'd had a hay ring there, whether anything had leaked. No, and no. He said sometimes you get a rock ledge close to the surface and the grass over it burns off first in a dry year. That's a real thing. It happens all over the Ozarks. You'll see the outline of a bedrock shelf show up in a pasture in August like a photograph developing. But bedrock ledges don't have corners. I said that to him and he laughed and said, "Sure they do, if the joints are right." And he had me there, because that's true too. Limestone breaks along joints, and joints in flat-lying rock run in sets, and the sets are usually close to perpendicular to each other, and if you get a block bounded by 2 joint sets, you can absolutely get a rectangular slab of rock sitting under a pasture. I had told a couple thousand tourists a version of that sentence at Blanchard Springs. I knew it better than he did, so I went and got the soil probe. A soil probe is a T-handle with a hollow steel tube on the end and a slot cut down one side. You drive it in with your boot and pull up a core. Mine's a 3-footer I've had since the 90s. In Clarksville chert, you hit rock constantly and have to pull out and move over a foot and start again, so you take a lot of cores. I took 41 cores that afternoon, 9 inside the rectangle in a grid, the rest working outward in rings. And I wrote every one down in a notebook, with the depth and what came up, because that's how I was trained and because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Inside the rectangle, brown silt loam with chert gravel. Moist. Then more of the same. Then refusal at somewhere between 22 and 31 inches on every single core. Outside the rectangle, brown silt loam with chert gravel. Moist. Then more of the same. Then refusal at somewhere between 24 and 34 inches. No difference. None. If there was a ledge under that rectangle, it was the same ledge that was under the whole meadow, which is exactly what you'd expect, because there is a ledge under the whole meadow. That's the Ozarks. The rock is right there. I went back the next morning with a shovel and a mattock and dug a hole at the center of the rectangle. And it took me 2 hours, and I am not too proud to tell you I had to sit down twice. 2.5 feet down I was on solid rock, Boone limestone, gray with black chert bands in it, unbroken across the whole bottom of the hole. I widened the hole, and it stayed unbroken. I ran the mattock point along it looking for a seam, and I found one hairline joint running about north-northeast, and I chased it 8 inches, and it was tight enough that I couldn't get the corner of a putty knife into it. Nothing under there. Rock. Just rock. I filled the hole back in, which took another hour, and went to the house and drank about a quart of water, and told Wanda I'd found a dead spot in the meadow. And she said, "Is that why you dug a grave out there?" 2 days later, I borrowed a metal detector from a fellow I used to work with, Ray Patterson, who retired the year before I did and who has spent his whole retirement finding square nails and shotgun hulls. I ran the rectangle and 8 feet out on all sides, 2 hits, a staple and a piece of barbed wire, both within a foot of the surface, both consistent with a pasture that had a fence through it in 1950. Ray came out and helped, and afterward we stood looking at the dead grass and he said, "What do you think it is?" "A rock ledge." "You just told me you dug and there's no ledge." "There's a ledge under the whole meadow." "Then why's the grass only dead here?" I didn't have an answer, and Ray is not a man who lets a thing go. So we walked the whole 11 acres, quartering it like you'd walk a field for a lost dog. Took 2 hours. We found one more. It was up the slope to the northeast. 100 and change from the first one, in the rougher part where the fescue gives way to broom sedge and the ground starts to roll. Same thing. 4 corners, 4 straight sides. Dead grass standing up in it. Live grass right against it. I taped it. 3'5" by 5 foot even. The long axis ran the same direction as the first one, within a couple degrees. Which Ray thought was interesting, and which I found harder to look at than he did. He said, "Well, that settles it. That's your joint set." And it might have been. 2 rectangles, same bearing, both lined up with the regional jointing, both sitting over the same limestone. That is a defensible geological statement. I have made worse ones in front of paying visitors, but I had dug a hole in the first one, and there was no rock under it that was any different from the rock under the rest of the meadow. And the 2 rectangles were the same size, within 2 inches, and rock does not know how to be the same size. Here's the part I keep coming back to. If you'd asked me in September of 2022 what I thought was going on, I'd have said I didn't know, and it probably didn't matter. It's a hayfield. Nobody's hurt. Grass grows back. And I meant it. I moved the east camera about 15 feet north so the first rectangle sat closer to the center of its frame, and I moved the video camera to cover the second one. And I told myself I was doing it out of curiosity, which was 90% true. The other 10% was that on the drive back from Ray's I had thought about the hogs again, and about the fact that whatever moved 8 animals across that meadow at a dead run had done it inside the same 13 days that the first rectangle appeared. And once you have thought a thing like that, you cannot unthink it. October came in dry and warm and then broke cold the 3rd week, the way it does. We got 2.5 inches of rain on the 26th, the first real rain since August, and the branch came up overnight and was down again by Friday. The cameras ran. I pulled cards on the 1st and the 15th, and both times it was deer and coons and 1 bobcat that walked right up to the east camera and put its nose about 4 inches from the lens, which is a picture I still have on the refrigerator. The rectangles stayed dead. They didn't spread. They didn't grow in. When the first frost came on the 22nd and knocked the whole meadow brown, they disappeared, in the sense that you could no longer see them from the porch, because everything was the same color. But if you walked out there, you could still find them by the feel of the ground under your boots. The dead grass had a crunch the live grass didn't have. One more thing about the science before we get to the 29th, because people have told me since that I should have known better, and I'd like to lay out what I actually knew. I knew karst. In Cherty limestone country, the surface is not a lid, it's a filter, and water goes down through it in 1,000 places and takes the soil with it. A sinkhole in the Ozarks usually starts as a soil void rather than a rock void. The limestone opens a joint. The dirt above it pipes down into the crack a grain at a time, and you get a cavity with a grass roof over it that will hold a man for years, and then quit holding him on a Tuesday. I've seen a cow's back legs go into one. I've written more than one incident report about a truck that parked on the wrong 10 square feet. And I knew that a soil void will kill the grass over it, because the roots lose their contact with the water below. That is a real explanation. That is the explanation. A rectangle of dead grass over a limestone joint set in a dry year, with a soil void developing underneath, is a textbook incipient sinkhole, and I could have written it up as one and been done. Except a soil void will not hold a 3-foot soil probe. I put 41 cores in that ground, and every one of them found dirt all the way down and then rock. There is no void. There has never been a void. I have dug into it with my own hands. So at the end of October, I was a man with a reasonable explanation that his own evidence had already killed, and I was in no hurry about it, and I had no idea I was 3 nights out from the picture and 6 days out from seeing it. I pulled cards on the 4th of November. It was a Friday, cold. One of the first mornings that year I had to scrape the truck. I walked up to the east camera, swapped the card, walked across to the video camera and swapped that one, went down to the south gate for the 3rd, and came back to the house and put the kettle on. Wanda was at the table with the paper. Ryan was up for the weekend, still asleep at 9 in the morning, 16 years old and built for it. I sat down with the laptop and the first card and started scrolling, and it was deer, 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 coon, deer, coon, deer. The east camera had 482 images on it from the 15th of October to the 4th of November. I know the number because I wrote it in the notebook. Image 391 is timestamped October 29th, 2:47 and 11 seconds a.m. Let me tell you what's in the frame before I tell you what's wrong with it, because you need the ordinary parts first. The camera is on a cedar about 4 feet up, aimed a little downslope, looking west across the meadow. Bottom of the frame is the grass at the base of the tree, lit hot white by the infrared, every blade sharp. Middle of the frame is the low place, 40 to 45 feet out, where the first rectangle is. Past that, the ground rises and the grass goes gray, and by 70 feet it's dark, and the tree line is a black band across the top with nothing in it. The date stamp sits in the bottom right corner in that pale gray the Brownings use. The moon was 3 days past new. Everything you can see, the camera is making. In the low place, 40-some feet out, a section of the ground is standing up. It is hinged along the far side, the north long edge, and it is tilted up toward the camera at an angle I later measured off the photograph at 38 degrees. The face of it, the part standing up, the part I can see is grass, fescue and broom sedge, brown, frost-killed, matted, exactly like the rest of the meadow. Some of it has folded over the top edge and is hanging down the back the way hair falls when you tip your head. Along the near edge, the free edge, the one closest to the camera, there is about 2 inches of soil showing under the sod, brown and rough, with 2 or 3 pale chert cobbles in it catching the infrared. Under the raised edge, where there should be a hole, there is black. That black behaves differently from every other dark part of the frame. Trail cameras are noisy at night, and if you zoom into the shadows anywhere else in that frame, you get the speckle you always get. The area under the raised slab has no speckle. It's flat. The infrared went into it and did not come back, and I have looked at that region at every magnification my laptop will do, and there is nothing in it. There is no dirt pile. That's the thing I keep landing on. If you lift a 3 by 5 foot slab of Ozark ground on a hinge, the near edge has to come out of a hole, and the hole has to have edges, and the soil at those edges has to crumble and fall, because Clarksville chert has no cohesion to speak of once you break it. There should be a berm. There should be spill. There should be loose rock lying out on the grass. There is grass, right up to the line, standing. Image 392 is timestamped 2:47 and 25 seconds. 14 seconds later, the meadow is flat. The low place is a low place. The dead rectangle is there, the way it had been since September. A patch of brown in the middle of brown. Nothing is disturbed. No seam, no crack, no line where an edge would sit. The grass at the north side, the side the thing was hinged on, is standing up like grass. 14 seconds. There is no image between them, and the Browning fires as fast as you can want it to 1/5 of a second on the trigger. And if it sees continued motion, it'll take another and another. It took 2. Something crossed the detection zone at 47 past 2. The camera fired and got the slab up, and 14 seconds later the sensor was tripped again, and the camera fired and got the slab down. And in between, the ground opened or closed or both, and did it without generating enough heat differential to trip the sensor a 3rd time. I did not react. I've read accounts where the man says he dropped his coffee, and maybe some men do. What I did was go back 1 image to 390. A doe at 11:08 the night before. Then forward to 393. A coon at 4:19 that same morning. Then back to 391. I ran that loop 4 or 5 more times, and by the end of it, Wanda had put her paper down and was watching me instead of reading. "What?" she said. I turned the laptop around. She looked at it a while. She's not a woman who performs. She put her glasses up on her head and leaned in the way she does, and she looked at it for probably 40 seconds, and then she said, "Is that in our field?" "Yeah." "What's under it?" "I don't know." "Wayne, what is under it?" I said, "There's nothing under it." I dug it. There's rock 2.5 foot down, and I've had a probe in it 40 times. She looked at the screen again, and then she looked out the kitchen window, which faces east and does not face the meadow. And she said, "So I went and dug it again." I took the mattock and the shovel and the tape, and I walked up there at about 11 in the morning on a clear, cold Friday with the frost still in the shade. And I found the rectangle, and I laid the tape along the north edge where the hinge would have been, and I got down on my knees and went along that hole 3 foot 4 inches with my face about a foot off the ground. Grass. Roots. Dirt. There was no seam in it, and no crack, and no line of any kind. The frost was still on the north edge of that rectangle in the same unbroken sheet it was on everywhere else in the shade, and frost does not survive a hinge. I dug anyway. I dug a trench across the whole rectangle the short way, 8 inches wide, down to rock. And it took me until 3 in the afternoon, and I ruined a shovel handle. Under it was the same limestone I'd found in September, unbroken, with the same tight joint running north-northeast. And this time I went at that joint with a masonry chisel and a 3-pound hammer for 20 minutes, and opened it up maybe half an inch, and it closed back down into solid rock. There is no door there. I need you to understand that I am not telling you a story about a hatch that somebody built in my hayfield. I have taken that ground apart with my hands. It is dirt and rock, and it goes down to the Boone limestone, and the Boone limestone goes down 400 feet. I filled the trench. I walked back down to the house in the dark with the tools over my shoulder and my knees hollering at me. And I ate supper. And afterward I sat back down at the laptop and put image 391 up on the screen. And Ryan came through the kitchen with a bowl of cereal at 9 o'clock at night, the way a 16-year-old does, and stopped behind my chair. He looked at it for about 2 seconds. He said, "Papa, why is there a cellar door in the field?" I hadn't said the word cellar to him. I hadn't said it to Wanda either, or out loud to myself. I'd been calling it a slab in my head all day, because slab is a geology word and geology words are comfortable. A 16-year-old looked at it for 2 seconds and said cellar. And he was right. And the reason he was right is that everybody who grew up in this part of the country has seen 100 of them. A pair of slanted doors laid over a hole. One leaf propped up, grass growing over the boards because nobody's opened it since Eisenhower. There is a real one on my place, 210 yards north of that rectangle, up against the tree line, with the dry-laid foundation of my grandfather's first house around it, and a hackberry growing out of the northeast corner. I got a flashlight and went up there that night, which was stupid, and I knew it while I was doing it, and I did it anyway because I was 63 years old on my own ground and I was not going to lie in bed until daylight wondering. The cellar was open the way it has been open my whole life. A rock-lined throat about 4 feet across with block around the lip and no doors on it since before I was born. I put the light down in it. Leaves. A 5-gallon bucket my father put down there sometime in the 70s. Water standing in the bottom. Maybe 6 inches. Black and still. And on the lip of it, in the frost, going down into the hole and not coming back out. A track pressed into the leaf mold that I could not make anything out of at all. I've looked at a great many tracks in my life. It comes with the job. You learn deer and hog and coyote and bobcat and bear early. And after that, you learn the ones that fool people, which are mostly dog and armadillo and, in wet leaves, nothing at all. What was on the lip of that cellar was pressed into about an inch of frozen leaf mold, and it was maybe 9 inches long and 4 across at the widest, and it was smooth. No toes, no pads, no claw marks. The edges were rounded, not sharp, so it hadn't been made by anything with a hard rim. The bottom of the impression was flat and slightly dished, and it had one straight edge running down the outside, which is not a shape any foot I know how to name will make. There was one of them, not a trail. One impression on the flat block at the lip of the cellar, pointed in, and then the rock throat, and then 6 inches of standing water at the bottom. I photographed it with my phone at 11:40 at night. Flashlight held off to the side to throw a shadow across it, which is how you photograph a track. I've shown that picture to 4 people. 2 said armadillo, which it is not, because an armadillo leaves 4 toes in front and 5 behind, and nothing it does leaves a smooth dish. 1 said a boot heel that slipped. 1 didn't say anything. I got out of there. I'll admit that plainly. I stood up and I walked back to the house at a pace I would have been embarrassed for anybody to see. And I locked the back door, which I do not do. And then I stood in the kitchen with the light off, looking north at nothing for about 20 minutes. The next morning it was gone. Thawed out and gone, the way a track in frost goes. And all that was left was leaf mold. I called Virgil Owens on the 7th of November. Virgil is 77 now, 74 then. He guided at Blanchard Springs from 1974, the year after it opened, and stayed on that mountain in one job or another into the middle 90s. On his own time, he surveyed caves. Him and a bunch of fellows out of Fayetteville and Springfield and one dentist from Batesville spent 20 years going into every hole in the Sylamore country, with a Sunto compass and a clinometer and a fiberglass tape and drawing what Fayetteville they found on mylar and pencil. The reason you've never seen those maps is that cave locations do not get published. They didn't then, and they especially don't now. That last part matters. If you go looking for a list of the wild caves in the Ozark National Forest, you will not find one. It isn't a conspiracy, it's policy. And every land agency in cave country has the same one. People die in caves. And the more of them that know where the entrance is, the more of them die. And there are bats. White nose syndrome came into Arkansas around 2013, and the Forest Service closed the caves on the Ozark Street. Francis to entry in 2009 as a precaution, and they stayed closed for years. Gray bats are federally endangered, and they winter in this district by the tens of thousands. So the caves are gated where they can be gated and unpublished where they can't. And the men who know where the holes are in their 70s now, and they do not tell you. I say all that so you understand why the answer to "why can't you just look it up?" is that nobody can just look it up, and why the only reason I ever saw the map I'm about to describe is that I helped carry Virgil Owens' gear for 12 years, and he decided I was all right. I told him on the phone I had a picture I wanted him to look at. He asked what of. I said I'd rather show him. He said, "Is it in a cave?" "Oh, is it in a cave?" "No, it's in my hayfield." There was a pause on that phone long enough that I said his name to see if the call had dropped. He said, "I'll come Wednesday." He came Wednesday, up the drive in a Ford Ranger about as old as our friendship, with a cardboard box on the seat beside him. Virgil is a small man, built like a piece of cable, with hands that don't work right anymore and a knee that grinds on a step down. Wanda fed him, because Wanda feeds everybody. And we talked about people we used to work with and who had died since spring. Then I set the laptop in front of him and brought up image 391 and didn't say a word. He put his glasses on, leaned in with his hands flat on either side of the machine, and looked at that photograph a long time without moving, long enough that Wanda quit doing dishes. Then he said, "Which edge is it hinged on?" "North." "You sure?" "The camera faces west. The far long edge, on the right of frame. That's north." He nodded slowly, still looking. He said, "That's uphill." "It is. A door on a hinge falls closed downhill. Every one I ever saw." He straightened up and took the glasses off and set them on the table and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. "That one has to be held." I did not have anything to say to that, so I got him a cup of coffee. Then he pulled the cardboard box up onto the table and opened it and took out a roll of mylar sheets and a spiral notebook with a green cover soft as cloth. He said, "How far from the house?" I told him. "About 400 yards north-northeast, up on the bench." He said, "Get me a map." I had a district quad map in the shop, a 7.5-minute topo I'd been carrying in a truck for 30 years, and I brought it in, and we cleared the table and spread it out and put the salt and pepper and 2 coffee cups on the corners. He found my place on it inside of 10 seconds, which nobody does, and put his finger on the meadow. Then he unrolled the mylar. Cave surveys don't look like what people expect. It isn't a picture of a cave. It's a centerline drawn as straight segments with numbered stations, with a shaded outline around it showing how wide the passage ran. Little cross-sections hanging off the side. A north arrow, a scale bar, a date, and the initials of everybody who was in there. This one said August, 1978, and under that, 4 sets of initials. He laid it beside the topo, lined the north arrows up, slid it until the entrance symbol sat where he wanted it, and put his finger on a spot in the hollow west of my line, on Forest Service ground, 1/2 mile from my meadow. He said, "That's the entrance. You've walked past it. It's under a ledge in the bluff line above the branch. And if you don't know it's there, you'll never see it. I know that bluff line. Sure you do. You don't know that hole. Then he ran his finger along the mylar, east, following the line. And he did it slowly, station by station, and I watched his finger cross onto my property and keep going. The passage went nearly a quarter-mile east. It ran, as near as they could put it, under the county road, under the west end of my ground, under the low place in the meadow, and past it, on the same bearing, and stopped in a spot about 100 yards inside the timber at the northeast corner of my property. I said, "That's under my field. About 60 foot under it, near as we could ever figure. Boone on top, then you're into the street, Joe, and the Everton down where we were. It's dry passage. Wet weather stream in the bottom of it when it rains hard, dry as a bone the rest of the year." He tapped the end of the line. "Right there is where we quit." The last station on that survey was numbered 41. I asked him why they quit, and he did the thing he did on the phone, which is nothing. For a while. Then he opened the green notebook and turned to a page about 2/3 through and turned it around so I could read it. The entry was in pencil, faded but plain, in a hand that slanted hard right. It gave the date, the 12th of August, 1978. The 4 names, the time in and the time out. Then a column of numbers, the shots, which meant nothing to me at that distance. And at the bottom, under station 41, 5 words. Stopped at 41. Sound. Not pushed. I read it about 6 times. Then I said, "What sound?" Virgil took the notebook back and closed it and put his hand flat on top of it and left it there. He said, "Wayne, I've been asked that question maybe twice in 44 years, and both times I've said I don't remember. And I want you to understand that I'm not saying that to you. All right. We were at 41 and there was breakdown in front of us, big stuff, refrigerator size, and there was airflow coming through it. Good airflow, which means passage. We'd have pushed it. Any other day of my life I'd have moved rock till supper." He turned the coffee cup around on the table without picking it up. It come from ahead of us, through the breakdown. It was low. Not a growl. Not water. Water I know. He stopped. It was a sound a thing makes when it's set into something and it moves. Stone on stone. It was long, 3-4 seconds, and then it quit, and then about a minute later it went the other way. The other way. Same sound backwards. He looked up at me then. Something opened and then it shut. And it was 100 foot beyond where any man had ever been. Nobody said anything. Wanda had her back to the sink, and both hands on the counter behind her. Virgil said, "We come out. Wrote it down. Went back in 79 and the airflow had quit, and the breakdown was tight, and we never got another foot out of that cave. And after a while we quit going. Then the cave got closed for the bats and that was the end of it." I said, 1978, August. "And you never told anybody." He said, "I told the 3 men that were standing next to me and they were all there anyway, and every one of them's dead now, and I told my wife, and I'm telling you." He pushed the notebook an inch toward me. "I'm 74. I don't have a lot of use for keeping it." We went out to the meadow that afternoon. Virgil walks slow and it's a quarter-mile uphill from the house, so it took a while, and Bud worked the fence line ahead of us the whole way. Clear. About 40 degrees, north wind. The meadow gone the flat brown it goes in November. I took him to the first rectangle. He walked around it twice, once each direction. And then he squatted down at the north edge, which cost him something to do. And he put his hand flat on the grass and left it there. He said, "How wide?" 3'4". 5'1" long. And the other one, 3'5" by 5 even. He got up. He said, "Show me the second one." I took him up the slope to it. He looked at that one about half as long, then he stood there with his hands in his coat pockets looking northeast, up the meadow toward the timber. And he said, "You got a compass in that truck?" We shot the long axis of both rectangles, 31 degrees on the first, 33 on the second. Then Virgil put the compass on the line between them, corner to corner. And it read 32. They weren't just oriented the same. They were on a line with each other. On the same bearing they were pointed. He said, How far apart? I paced it and then went and got the tape and did it properly. And it was 304 feet, he said. Then keep going. So we did. We walked the bearing, 32 degrees, from the second rectangle up through the broom's edge toward the northeast corner. Virgil counting his steps out loud because his stride is short and he knows it, and at about 300 feet the ground came up into a low swell and we found the third one. The grass up there is thinner and there's more moss on the exposed chert, so the dead patch was harder to see. But it was there, and it had corners, 3'4" by 5'1", on the nose. Same as the first. I stopped enjoying myself right about then. The fourth was 300 feet further, in the timber under white oak. And it wasn't dead grass because nothing grows under a closed canopy. It was a rectangle where the leaves lay flat and packed and gray, while the leaves around it were loose and brown. I'd have walked over it 100 times and never seen it if I hadn't been on a compass bearing looking for it. That put us 30 feet inside my north property line. At the corner. Beyond that corner is Forest Service ground. My old outfit's ground. 6,000 acres of it in that block before you get to anything with a house on it. Virgil sat down on a log. He was gray in the face and his knee was done, and he sat there a good while. He said, "Wayne, how many is that?" 4. On a line. On a line. He said, "Then take that line back the other way." We didn't do it that day. He couldn't have walked it. I drove him back to the house and he ate supper with us and left the mylar and the notebook on my kitchen table and said, "Bring it back when you're done." And he was gone by 7. I took the line the other way the next morning by myself. Southwest from the first rectangle, 304 feet, is off the meadow, down the slope, into the cedars. I found the fifth one in a bare spot between 2 cedars, where nothing grows anyway. And I only found it because the pine straw and cedar duff had the same packed gray look as the leaves in the timber. 300 feet past that is the west fence line. 300 feet past that is the county road. I did not go looking on the far side of the county road, because the far side of the county road is Carl Griffin's, and because I had already gotten what I came for. That night I got out the mylar and the topo and a ruler and did what Virgil had done, slower and with the light on. The center line of that cave, as surveyed in August of 1978, runs an average bearing of 31 degrees from the entrance to station 41. My 5 rectangles run 32. Lay the mylar on the quad at scale with the entrance where Virgil put it, and the line of rectangles falls on the line of the cave about as close as you'd expect from a 78 compass survey and a man with a ruler at a kitchen table. Not perfect, not off by anything that means anything, either. 5 rectangles, 60 feet of solid rock between them and the passage, 300-foot spacing, which is a number that means nothing to me and never has. And the passage ends at station 41. And station 41 is under the third rectangle. The fourth one and the fifth one are past the end of the map. Number 4 is northeast of everything anybody ever surveyed, out in the direction Virgil's crew was headed when they heard whatever they heard. Number 5 is southwest, back toward the entrance. Past passage they'd already walked through 100 times, which means the line does not end where the cave ends. The line just keeps going, in both directions. Underground nobody has ever been in, and the only reason I know where it goes is that the grass dies over it. I put cameras on all 5. That took most of November and $700 I hadn't planned on spending. I moved the 2 Brownings I had, bought 2 more of the same model so they'd all behave alike, and picked up a Tacticam Reveal cellular unit on the theory that it could send pictures to my phone and save me the walk. That theory lasted 11 days. Coverage on my place is 1 bar on the porch on a good afternoon. The Tacticam sat up there full of pictures it couldn't send, and I ended up putting a regular card in it and treating it like the rest. I aimed them all alike, 4 feet up on a tree or T-post, 25 to 30 feet back, so the rectangle sat mid-frame with no sky in the shot. At the far corner of each I set a length of white PVC on a stake, painted with 2 black bands 8 inches apart, so I'd have a scale in every photograph. That's a thing you learn at a job like mine. If you don't put a ruler in the picture is worth half what it could be. Then I waited, through the last of November and all of December, and pulled cards every Saturday morning. And what I got was deer. Thousands of deer. It was rut, and that meadow is a travel corridor. I got bucks I'd never seen in 15 months of running 2 cameras. A 9-point that came through every 4th or 5th night on the same line. Coyotes and coons and 1 gray fox and about 400 armadillos. And in the middle of all of it, on the 17th of December, at 3:11 in the morning, camera 3, that's the one on the 3rd rectangle, the one over the end of the survey, took a picture of that ground standing open. Same as October. Hinged on the north long edge, tilted up toward the camera, 30-some degrees. Grass on the face of it. Nothing under it that the infrared could find. The PVC scale stake was in the frame this time. 28 feet from the lens. And off that stake I could put a number on the thing. The raised edge stood 31 inches off the ground at the free corner, and the slab was 61 inches long, which is 5'1". 5'1". Same as the rectangle. Same as October. The next image is 19 seconds later, and the ground is flat. I sat with that one a long time. Then I did the arithmetic, which is what took me from a man with a strange photograph to a man who did not sleep well for a year. Tilt a 5-foot slab of ground up 38 degrees on a hinge, and you open a hole a bit over 3 feet wide at the mouth, and you are looking straight into that hole from 28 feet away with an infrared array that will light a coon's eyes at 80. There is no back wall in the photograph. I have measured that geometry on paper with a protractor, and out in the yard with 2 sawhorses and a sheet of plywood. And at that angle and that distance the camera sees a good 5 or 6 feet down into an opening that size. In the December photograph, and the October one, and the 4 more I got over the next 14 months, the infrared goes in and nothing comes back from any range at all. There is no floor in it, and no wall, and no rock. It goes in, and it quits. Wanda started sleeping poorly around then. She's practical, and she does not scare. But she'd married a man who had begun spending his Saturdays walking a compass, bearing across his own hayfield, with a notebook. And she'd seen the pictures, and she was the one alone in the house 2 days a week when I drove to Batesville to see Michelle and the boy. She said one night in January, "I want you to tell me what you think it is." I said I didn't know. She said, "That isn't what I asked." So I told her. I said I thought there was passage under my place that went further than anybody had ever been, and that there were ways up out of it, several of them, on a straight line, spaced even. I said the ways up were shut almost all the time, and shut so tight that frost sat on them unbroken, and a soil probe went through and hit bedrock. And I said I could not make the front half of that sentence live with the back half, and I'd quit trying. She said, "Does it come out?" And that is the question. That is the only question that ever mattered. And my wife asked it in January of 2023 at the kitchen table, and I did not have an answer for her. The hawks had run. Something ran them at 2:06 in the morning on the 7th of September, and there was nothing in the frame. I said, "I don't know." She said, "Then find out, or take the cameras down. I can live either way. I can't live with you halfway," which is the most useful thing anybody said to me in the whole 2 years. So I tried to find out. March of 2023 was wet. 7 inches in the first 2 weeks, and the branch in the hollow ran hard enough to move gravel, which it does maybe twice a year. Every one of the 6 times that ground had opened on a camera had come inside 5 days of a heavy rain. I'd written that down in February and not made much of it, because in karst country everything lines up with rain. Water is the engine. Springs come up, sinkholes take water. Air moves in and out of every hole on the mountain when the barometer changes. If you tell me a thing in limestone country happens after a rain, you have told me almost nothing. But it was a pattern, and I had a wife who had given me a fair choice. So on the night of the 16th of March, I went out and sat in the barn. The barn is halfway up the slope, 140 yards from the first rectangle, with the loft door on the north end facing the meadow. I put a chair up there, and a sleeping bag, and a thermos. I had a digital night vision monocular I'd paid $240 for. One of the cheap ones that runs off an infrared emitter and gives you a green picture with about as much detail as a bad photocopy. At 100 yards it will show you a deer and tell you it's a deer. And that's the end of what it'll do. Bud came up with me and lay down on the loft boards and went to sleep, because he was 10 years old and this was well past his bedtime. It rained off and on until 11. After that it cleared and the temperature dropped, and by 1 in the morning there was fog coming up out of the hollow in sheets, which is normal on a clear night after rain, and which made the monocular about useless below the meadow. Above the meadow it was clear. I could see the whole open ground in that flat green, the fence line, the 2 big cedars, the pale spot where the first rectangle was. I sat 4 hours and nothing happened, and I was mostly bored and cold and thinking about going in. At 3:51 I heard it. I know the time because I had the phone in my hand checking the radar when it started, and I looked at the clock the second it registered. It came from up the slope, northeast, from the direction of the 3rd and 4th rectangles, and it was low enough that I felt it in the floorboards before I was sure I was hearing it. Thunder was the first thing I ruled out. A truck on the county road was the second, because a truck on that road comes from the wrong direction and has an engine in it. It was stone. That's the only word I've got, and it's the word Virgil used 45 years before I ever heard the thing myself. Stone moving against stone. Under load. Slow. It ran 3 or 4 seconds and stopped. Bud was up before I was. He went off that loft ladder in about 2 jumps, which he had no business doing at his age, and out the barn door, and I got to the loft opening in time to see him going up the meadow in the fog with his nose down and his tail up, and I hollered at him and he did not check even a little. I did not go after him. That's what I've thought about most since. I was 64 years old with a bad knee and a flashlight and a $200 monocular, and there was fog on the ground and 400 yards of wet meadow between me and my dog, and I stood in that loft door with my hand on the frame and I did not go. At about 4:02 the sound came again. Shorter. 2 seconds, maybe. Then nothing. I stayed in that barn until it started to get light at 5:45, and I called that dog probably 200 times. He came in at 7:40, up the drive, from the north. He was soaked, and he was not muddy, and that's the thing. It had rained the night before, and there was mud everywhere on my place, and Bud came up the drive with wet legs and a wet belly, and nothing on him past the hocks. He was wet like a dog that had been in still water and then walked out of it onto rock, and he smelled like a cave. If you've been in caves, you know it. And if you haven't, I can't get you there with words. It's a cold smell. Wet rock and wet clay with no rot in it, because nothing rots down there the way it does on top. Flat and mineral, with an ammonia edge if there's bats. It doesn't smell like a basement or a spring. I spent 10 years walking people through Blanchard Springs caverns, and I have that smell in the back of my head permanently, and it came up my driveway on my dog on the morning of the 17th of March. I got down on the porch boards and went over that dog inch by inch. No cuts, no swelling, eyes clear, gums pink. Nothing wrong with him but tired. There was a smear of orange-brown clay on his right shoulder and in his collar that was not any dirt I have on my place. Our clay is red and full of chert grit. This was smooth, the color of a cheap flower pot, with no rock in it at all. I put some of it in a pill bottle. Bud ate his breakfast and slept most of the day, and by evening he was himself. But he never went past the barn again in what he had left. He'd go to the barn, and he'd sit down at the corner of it, and if I kept walking up toward the meadow, he would stand there and watch me go, and he would not follow, and when I came back he'd get up and walk down to the house with me like nothing had happened. That dog went everywhere with me for 9 years. After the 17th of March, he had exactly one place he would not go, and it was the 11 acres in the middle of my own farm. I pulled all 5 cards that afternoon. Cameras 1, 2, 4, and 5 had the ordinary March traffic on them. Deer, coons, a bobcat, 2 turkeys. Camera 3, the one on the rectangle over Station 41, had 460 images, and then stopped having them. The last file on that card is numbered 0460. The one before it is 0458. There is no 0459. The Brownings number sequentially and they do not skip. I've pulled well over 100 cards off those cameras and never seen a gap in the numbering, before or since. Image 458 is time-stamped 3:51 a.m. That's the minute I heard it in the barn. It shows the rectangle, closed, flat, with the white PVC scale stake standing at the corner, and there is nothing else in the frame. Image 460 is time-stamped 4:09, and it is not pointed at the rectangle. The camera is looking northeast, up the slope into the timber. At an angle I later measured at 41 degrees off where I set it. The strap was still tight. I'd cinched it myself in November with a ratchet around an 8-inch white oak. And it hadn't slipped, because the mark the buckle pressed into the bark over 4 months was still there, and the buckle was no longer in it. The camera had been rotated on that tree against the strap tension. 41 degrees. Between 3:51 and 4:09 in the morning, which is the same 18 minutes I was standing in my barn loft calling my dog. What's in image 460 is leaf litter and white oak trunks and the black of the timber past the infrared range. There is nothing in it. I have looked at it more than any other picture I own and there is nothing in it. But it is pointed at the 4th rectangle, a few degrees south of the bearing. But if you stood at that camera and looked where it was looking, 300 feet out through the trees, that's what you'd be looking at. That's the last picture camera 3 ever took. The batteries were at 60%. It never fired again, and when I brought it down and put fresh cells in it, it worked fine. And it has worked fine ever since. I did not report it, and I'll explain why. Because people assume a man who spent 29 years with a federal land agency has somebody to call. I do have somebody to call. That's the problem. I know exactly what happens. Because for a good part of my career, I was the fellow on the other end of that phone. Somebody calls the district office and says there's a hole in the ground out back that opens at night. Whoever takes the call writes it on a slip. If it's on Forest Service ground, somebody might go look in a month. If it's private, and mine is, the answer is we don't have jurisdiction, and here's the number for the county. And then, because it is a small county and everybody I worked with for 3 decades still lives here, the story gets told at the office and at the co-op. And by Christmas, Wayne Dixon is the retired rec tech on the county road who's seeing things in his hayfield, and Wanda hears about it at church. I've watched that happen to other people. I have, God forgive me, been in the room when it was funny. So, I did not call. I told 4 people in total. Wanda, Virgil, Ray Patterson, and eventually my daughter. That's the whole list. And none of them ever asked me to prove anything, which I have come to understand is a kind of gift. I ran the cameras through the rest of 2023. The ground opened on camera 2 on the 9th of May, camera 5 on the 2nd of August, and camera 4 on the 11th of November. Every one inside 5 days of a hard rain, every one between 2 and 4 in the morning, every one a frame open, and the next frame shut. 9 total, counting the 2 I've described. 9 photographs, taken over 13 months, by 4 different cameras, of 5 different pieces of my ground, standing up on a hinge. Then in January of 2024, I called a forestry consultant out of Batesville and asked him what it would take to put the meadow in pine. He walked it with me and said it was good ground for shortleaf, and that I'd been leaving money in that field for 40 years. Which is what a forestry consultant is going to say. I ordered seedlings out of the state nursery in February, 600 to the acre, and a crew put them in with dibble bars in 2 days flat while I watched from the truck. Carl Griffin came up and asked me what in the world I was doing, and I told him pine's worth more than hay, and he said that was the truth and he'd miss the hay, and that was the end of it. I brought the cameras down that same week, all 5. I put 2 of them on the yard fence, and 1 on the shop door, and the other 2 in a drawer in the shop where they still are. I have not walked up into that meadow since the 29th of February, 2024. That's the piece of it I feel worst about. My grandfather cleared that ground with a mule and a grubbing hoe in 1947. It fed cattle for 37 years, and Carl's cows for 20 more after that. I planted it back to timber so there'd be no open ground to look at and so I'd have a reason not to go. And I've let it grow up until you can't see 40 feet into it. And I sleep better. We spend more time in Batesville now. Michelle's got the room. Ryan's 19 and about to finish at the community college. And Wanda likes being close to them. We go down Thursday and come back Sunday most weeks. The house is still ours. The land is still ours. The pines are about waist high on me now. Bud died in November of 2025, of being old. He's buried at the corner of the yard fence, well down the hill, and I picked the spot on purpose. There's one more thing. Last October, I was cutting a dead cedar out of the fence line where it comes down off the meadow to the barn lot corner. which is as close to that ground as I go. And about 8 feet up in a hackberry I saw a strap. It was the old Browning Recon Force Elite, the video unit I'd bought in the winter of 2021. I'd moved it onto that hackberry in the fall of 23 to get a wider angle on the first rectangle from below, and then, plainly, forgotten it. I'd been counting 5 because 5 was the number of rectangles. I never counted cameras. The batteries were dead. The card was full. 1906 files. I sat at the kitchen table with the coffee, same as always, and went through all of it. Took 2 days. Deer. Hogs. Back in the summer of 24, once the meadow quit being a meadow. Coons. The planting crew in February, which was the last time anybody set foot on that ground. The card runs out on the 22nd of July, 2024, at 4:19 in the morning, when the batteries quit. The last 11 files are video. They start at 4:12 a.m. Each runs 30 seconds, and then the camera resets and takes another, which is what it does when the sensor stays tripped. 11 clips. 5.5 minutes. In every one of them, the ground over the first rectangle is standing open on the hinge, 30-some degrees, sod on the face of it, black underneath, and the foot-high pine seedlings around it moving a little in whatever wind there was. It does not close. It is open in the first frame of the first clip at 4:12, and it is open in the last frame of the 11th clip at 4:18 and 50-some seconds. And then the camera dies, and that is the end of the card and the end of everything I have. 5.5 minutes. And in all of it, nothing comes out and nothing goes in and nothing moves but the seedlings. I have not been up there. I know that's the question, so I'll answer it first. It has been 2 years since I walked that ground and a year and a half since that card ran out, and I don't intend to go. And if you want to call that cowardice, I'd have a hard time arguing. Here is what I tell myself instead. I tell myself the pines and the sprout growth have that meadow so thick now that I couldn't find a 3x5 patch of ground in there if I tried. I tell myself that whatever it is has been doing it since before 1978, and probably since before my grandfather ever put a plow in that bench, and that it has never once come down the 400 yards to the house. And I tell myself, on the nights when the rain's been hard and I'm lying there listening to the water run off the roof, that a thing that has to be held open on an uphill hinge is a thing that is holding it, and that it let go at 4:19 in the morning on the 22nd of July, 2024. Or else it didn't, and my camera just ran out of batteries first. That's the part I can't get around. The card ended, the door didn't.